Your daughter's little project was in the way. We cleaned up. That was the text message, word for word, sent by my brother's wife to the employee she'd just watched get fired from my shop. My shop. The one I built from a folding table at a farmer's market 8 years ago. The one I was paying the bills on while my 9-year-old daughter lay in a hospital bed 30 miles away coming out of anesthesia from a tonsillectomy. I read it sitting in a plastic chair next to Iris's bed. The monitors beeped softly. Her hand was warm and still under mine. She was sleeping. She didn't see my face when the photograph loaded. It was Iris's card, the one she'd spent weeks making. Pressed wildflowers, clippings from my shop floor, petals she'd pulled from delivery wrappings, tiny blooms she'd peeled off the cutting table and carried home in her jacket pocket. She had arranged them on cardstock and sealed them with clear adhesive, one petal at a time, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor after school. She had written across the top in careful, uneven letters, "Happy 8 years, Wildflower and Vine." She had placed it on the front counter herself the week before, leaning it against the register so every customer could see it. And there it was, in the trash, lying on top of tissue paper and stem cuttings and a crushed paper cup, tossed off the counter like junk mail. I set the phone face down on my knee. I looked at Iris. Her lips were dry. There was a small bruise on the back of her hand from the IV. She was 9 years old, and she had made something beautiful for something I had built, and someone had thrown it away while she was unconscious in a hospital. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I sat there, and I breathed, and I waited for her to wake up. If you've ever built something from nothing, only to have family try to take it from you, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me take you back to the beginning because none of this happened overnight. I opened Wildflower and Vine 8 years ago. I was 27. Iris was 1. I had a canopy tent, 2 folding tables, and a cooler full of arrangements I'd made in my kitchen at 4 in the morning. I set up at the Bardstown Road Farmers Market on a cold Saturday in November, and I sold 11 arrangements before noon. The next weekend, I sold 19. By the following spring, I had a wait list for Mother's Day orders. Within 2 years, I signed a lease on a storefront. Within 5, I had 3 full-time employees, standing wholesale accounts, and a reputation in Louisville for wedding florals that people booked a year in advance. By year 8, Wildflower and Vine was generating $295,000 in annual revenue. I was there 6 days a week. I knew every vendor by name. I could price a bridal arch in my sleep. I did all of it alone, and from the very first month that shop turned a profit, I started sending my parents $1,800 a month. That money covered 2 things, Gordon and Marianne's property taxes, which they'd fallen behind on before I ever opened the shop, and Wade's car insurance, because Wade was 23 and couldn't hold a job long enough to cover his own premiums. I told myself it was simply what family did. The first year, I thought it would be temporary. Wade would find steady work. Mom and Dad would catch up on the taxes. The payments would taper off. But they didn't. Wade quit a warehouse job after 4 months, started and abandoned a pressure washing business, took a sales position at an electronics store, lasted 11 months, left over what he called a disagreement with management, tried day trading, tried flipping furniture. Each time, the car insurance stayed on my monthly transfer because Wade never had anything of his own to replace it with. And my parents never said a word about it. Not thank you, not we appreciate this, not even we got the payment. The only acknowledgement I ever received was a text from my mother once a month confirming the deposit had arrived. Just the amount and the word received, like a receipt from a utility company, $1,800 a month, for 8 years. That's $172,800. I sent to my parents' household money I earned arranging flowers at 4 in the morning and delivering centerpieces in the back of my car and rebuilding arrangements when a cooler failed at 2 a.m. the night before a wedding. $172,800, and not $1 was ever returned. Not $1 was ever acknowledged as anything other than expected. And the whole time, Wade was the one they talked about. That was the part that sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't cough up. When Wade announced his pressure washing business, my mother called me to say how proud she was of his entrepreneurial spirit. When I moved Wildflower and Vine into its storefront, a lease I'd negotiated myself, a build-out I'd project managed on weekends. My mother asked if the neighborhood was safe enough for Iris. When Wade's furniture flipping venture was featured in a local Facebook group, my father shared the post. In 8 years, neither of my parents ever set foot inside my shop. I remember birthdays. I remember them clearly because the pattern was always the same. Wade got gifts that were chosen, A new jacket, concert tickets, a watch he'd pointed out in a magazine. I got a card with a check for $50 and my mother's handwriting that said, "Buy yourself something nice, honey." Every year, same card, same amount, same handwriting, like she had a stack of them ready in a drawer. I remember report cards. Wade brought home C's and was told he was smart but just needed to apply himself. I brought home A's and was asked by my mother once in the kitchen while she was loading the dishwasher why I couldn't be more like your brother, more social, more fun. I was 14. I had a 3.9 GPA. I stood at the counter holding my report card while she ran the faucet, and she didn't look up. My father said nothing. That was his way. Gordon Donnelly's silence was not neutral. It was permission. He sat at the head of every table, at every holiday, at every moment when something could have been said, and he looked at his plate. He looked at his hands. He cleared his throat the way he'd been clearing it for 30 years, and the moment passed, and Wade kept talking, and my mother kept laughing at whatever Wade said, and I kept swallowing it. I swallowed it because I told myself the payments were enough, that the money was my proof, that eventually they would see what I had built and understand what it cost me. That silence was the way to be loved in this family. I was wrong about all of it. Now let me tell you what happened on the day my daughter went into surgery. Iris had been scheduled for a tonsillectomy for 3 weeks. It wasn't an emergency. Her pediatrician had recommended it after a year of recurring infections. I'd arranged coverage at the shop. Ruth Halsey, my longest tenured employee, 6 years, 14 years total in floral design, was running the floor. 2 other senior staff were handling orders. Everything was set. I told my parents about the surgery. My mother said she hoped it would go smoothly. She did not offer to come to the hospital. She did not call the morning of. She did not ask about Iris once. Iris went into the procedure at 7:40 a.m. I sat in the waiting room with my hands folded in my lap, watching the clock above the nurse's station. The surgery took 45 minutes. She came out groggy, lips cracked, eyes half open. I held her hand and told her she did great. She squeezed my fingers once and fell back asleep. That was when my phone started buzzing. The first message was from Ruth. It was short. "Elise, something is happening at the shop. Call me when you can." I stepped into the hallway and called her. She picked up on the first ring, and her voice was tight in a way I had never heard from her in 6 years. She told me Wade had walked into Wildflower and Vine at 8:15 that morning. Tessa was with him. Wade was carrying a folder. He approached the front counter, opened the folder, and laid a document on the glass. It was an amended LLC filing for Wildflower and Vine. It listed Wade Donnelly as co-owner and managing member. It was forged. I had never signed it. I had never seen it. I had never agreed to any amendment of any kind. The operating agreement for Wildflower and Vine had one name on it: mine. There was no provision for adding members without my written, notarized consent. Wade had fabricated the entire document, but my staff didn't know that. Not in the moment. Wade stood at the counter and told them he was now co-owner and that he was making immediate changes to the business structure. He told Ruth her position was being eliminated. He told the other 2 senior staff the same, 3 employees, my 3 most experienced people, fired by a man who had never arranged a single stem, who had never opened the shop at 5 a.m. for a Saturday wedding loadout, who had never once walked through the door as anything other than someone looking for something to take. Ruth told me she tried to call me. My phone was on silent. She tried twice. While Wade was clearing out my staff, Tessa stood at the front counter. She picked up Iris's pressed flower card, the one Iris had spent weeks making, the one she'd placed against the register with both hands, stepping back to make sure it was straight. And Tessa swept it off the counter and into the waste bin behind the register. She didn't pause. She didn't read it. She didn't set it aside. She cleared it the way you clear a coffee ring. Ruth saw it happen. On her way out, after Wade had told her to collect her things, Ruth stopped at the bin. She looked down and saw the card lying on top of the trash. She took out her phone and photographed it. Then she reached in, lifted it out carefully, and took it with her. She smoothed it flat on the seat of her car. While all of this was happening, Wade sat down at the shop's back office computer. He accessed the business operating account. He transferred $41,700, the full liquid balance of Wildflower and Vine's operating funds, into a personal brokerage account in his name, $41,700. Money I had earned over months of wedding contracts, corporate accounts, weekly retail sales, holiday orders, transferred in a single transaction while I was holding my daughter's hand in a recovery room. I learned all of this in pieces. Ruth's call first, then a text from one of the other fired employees, then the photograph. The photograph of Iris's card lying in the trash, petals coming loose at the edges, her handwriting half visible through a crumpled receipt. And then 20 minutes later, a text forwarded from Ruth. A screenshot. Tessa had sent it to Ruth directly. Unprompted, like a footnote to the firing, like something she thought was funny or clarifying, or both. Your daughter's little project was in the way. We cleaned up. I read it sitting next to my sleeping daughter. I set the phone down. I looked at Iris's face. Her eyelids were thin and pale. There was a small line of dried adhesive on her wrist where the tape from the IV had been. She was 9 years old. She had made something with her hands for something I had made with mine, and they had thrown it away while she was unconscious, and they had fired the people who helped me build it, and they had taken the money that kept it running. I sat there for a long time. The monitors beeped. A nurse passed the doorway. Iris's breathing was even and slow. Something inside me shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break. Like a thread pulled taut for years, finally letting go. I was done pretending this was manageable. I was done telling myself this was the cost of family. I was done swallowing it. I looked at my daughter one more time. I picked up my phone, and I made one call. I called Dennis Ward at 6:47 p.m. from the hospital parking garage. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My car was 3 rows back, and I didn't walk to it. I stood between a concrete pillar and a minivan with a car seat in the back window, and I dialed the number I'd kept in my contacts for 2 years. Ever since I'd hired him to draft the operating agreement for Wildflower and Vine in the first place. He picked up on the second ring. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. I told him what had happened, point by point, the way I'd tell a vendor about a delivery schedule. Wade filed a forged LLC amendment. He used it to fire 3 employees. He transferred $41,700 from the business operating account into a personal brokerage. His wife threw my daughter's handmade card in the trash and texted my employee about it. I have a photograph. I have the screenshot. I have the operating agreement with one name on it. Mine. Dennis asked me 3 questions. Had I signed anything? Had I authorized any amendment? Had Wade ever been listed on any business document in any capacity? No, no, no. He said he'd file a forgery complaint and an emergency motion to void the LLC amendment in the morning. He asked me to send him everything I had. I said I would. I hung up. I walked to my car. I drove back to the hospital, checked on Iris one more time. Still sleeping, color better. The nurse said she'd be ready to go home in the morning. And then I drove home. The house was dark. The kitchen light was off. I turned it on, sat down at the table, and opened my laptop. I did not text Wade. I did not call my parents. I did not send a single message to anyone in my family. I pulled up 8 years of bank statements, monthly transfers, and $1,800 every month, never missed. I exported them to PDF. I opened my business account and screenshotted the transaction history. The $41,700 transfer was there, time-stamped, destination account listed. I saved it. I opened my email and found the original operating agreement Dennis had drafted. Sole member, sole owner, no amendment provisions without notarized written consent. I saved it. I forwarded Ruth's photograph of Iris's card in the trash. I forwarded the screenshot of Tessa's text. I attached everything to one email, addressed it to Dennis, and read it twice before sending. Then I closed the laptop. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet. The streetlight cut through the blinds and laid a thin stripe across the counter. Upstairs, Iris's room was empty. She was still at the hospital, sleeping under a warmed blanket in a bed with rails. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. Just clarity, like a window wiped clean for the first time in years. I did not sleep that night. I sat at that table until the light outside changed, and then I went back to the hospital to bring my daughter home. Dennis filed a forgery complaint at 9:08 the next morning. The emergency motion to void the LLC amendment went in the same day. I know because he called me at 9:22 to confirm both filings, and I was standing in Iris's room helping her onto the couch with a popsicle and a blanket while he spoke. I didn't tell Iris what was happening. She was 9. She had a sore throat and a stuffed rabbit and a plastic cup of crushed ice. She didn't need to carry any of it. That was the beginning. What came next was the part I should have expected, but somehow didn't. Within 48 hours of the complaint being filed, Gordon, my father, called my wholesale suppliers. He called 3 of them. He identified himself as the new management of Wildflower and Vine. He told them there had been a change in ownership and that all standing orders were to be canceled effective immediately. He spoke with authority, used the shop's name, and provided enough detail to sound credible. 3 vendors, $19,000 in standing wholesale orders, flowers I had contracted months in advance for weddings booked through the fall season. I found out when my primary supplier called me directly. She said a man had called that morning claiming to represent the shop and asking to cancel everything. She said it didn't sound right. I told her it wasn't right. I told her I was the sole owner of Wildflower and Vine, that no ownership change had occurred, and that any communication from anyone other than me should be disregarded. She reinstated the order. The other 2 suppliers took longer to sort out. One had already processed the cancellation, $19,000. My father, the man I had been sending $1,800 to every month for 8 years so he could keep his house, had called my suppliers and tried to destroy the business that was paying his property taxes. I forwarded the voicemail my supplier saved to Dennis. He logged it as evidence of coordinated interference. I didn't call my father about it. There was nothing to discuss. Then came my mother. The voicemail arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I was restocking the cooler at the shop, alone because 3 of my employees had been fired by a man with a forged document, and I hadn't had time to replace them yet. My phone buzzed on the work table. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it once, standing in the back room with my hands damp from stem water. Marianne's voice was cracked and wet. "Elise, you need to stop this. The stress of this is destroying my blood pressure. If something happens to me, you'll have to live with that. I don't understand why you're doing this to your brother. He was trying to help the business. You're tearing this family apart. Call me back. Please." She didn't mention Iris. She didn't mention the tonsillectomy. She didn't mention the card, or the firing, or the $41,700. She mentioned her blood pressure. I forwarded the voicemail to Dennis. Then I deleted it. I picked up the stem cutters and went back to the cooler. 2 days after the complaint was filed, my doorbell rang at 8 p.m. Iris was upstairs in bed. Her throat was still sore. I'd given her a popsicle and read her 2 chapters of a book about a girl who trained wild horses, and she'd fallen asleep with the book open on her chest. I'd come downstairs and was standing at the kitchen counter when the doorbell went. I looked through the side window. Wade, alone. Shirt untucked, stubble thicker than I'd ever seen it, eyes red-rimmed. He looked like he hadn't slept. He looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him, and he was still falling. I opened the door. I kept my hand on the frame. I did not step aside. "Elise?" His voice was lower than usual, controlled, but just barely. "We need to talk about this." I didn't respond. I just listened. This was a business arrangement. I was trying to bring some structure to the shop. You've been running everything alone for years, and I thought if I came in as a partner, we could scale it. I was trying to help. I said nothing. His jaw tightened. "Okay, fine. If you want to play it this way, Mom and Dad are done. You understand that? If you go through with this, the family walks away. All of us, you'll have nobody." I looked at him. I kept my voice steady. "Okay." 1 word. He blinked. His mouth opened and closed. He hadn't expected that. The silence held for 4 full seconds. I counted them. Then the volume dropped. The posture changed. His shoulders came forward and his hands opened at his sides, palms up, and his voice went thin and urgent. "Elise, please, just call the attorney. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. We can work this out inside the family. You don't need to involve lawyers and courts. This is family. No. Elise, I didn't do anything to my family, Wade." I stepped back. The door closed. Not a slam. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. I stood in the hallway with my back against the door. I could hear his footsteps on the porch. A pause. Then the creak of the steps as he left. Then his car starting. Then nothing. The house was silent. Upstairs, Iris was sleeping. The book about wild horses was still open on her chest. I went upstairs, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and closed the book with her page marked. Then I went back to the kitchen and turned off the light. 11 days after the complaint was filed, my phone rang at 8:14 a.m. I was standing in the kitchen. Iris was eating oatmeal at the table, her voice still slightly hoarse, talking about a drawing she wanted to make of a horse with flowers in its mane. I picked up the phone. It was Dennis. The court had voided the fraudulent LLC amendment. Full restitution ordered. $41,700 returned to the Wildflower and Vine operating account. Damages and legal fees assessed at $14,200. Total judgment against Wade, $55,900. The forgery documentation had been referred to the county prosecutor. I said thank you. I hung up. I set the phone on the counter. Iris looked up from her oatmeal. Who was that? Just the lawyer. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, sweetheart. She went back to her oatmeal. I stood at the counter with my hands flat on the surface, and I let the quiet settle around me like something I hadn't known I'd been missing. The kitchen was bright. The coffee was still warm. My daughter was eating breakfast and talking about horses. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt like someone who had been holding a door shut for 8 years and had finally just let go of the handle. I picked up the phone one more time. I opened my banking app. I went to the scheduled transfers. The $1,800 monthly payment. The one I had been sending without interruption for 8 years, $172,800 in total, sat at the top of the list. I tapped it. I tapped cancel. The confirmation screen appeared. I tapped confirm. The screen updated. The transfer was gone. I set the phone down. I poured another cup of coffee, and I sat down across from my daughter, who was drawing a horse with a mane full of wildflowers on the back of a placemat, and I watched her work. That was the last money I ever sent them. The call started that same week. Gordon first, 3 times in one afternoon. I let each one go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message the first 2 times. The third one was 11 seconds long. I know because I saw the notification before I deleted it without listening. Then Marianne, twice that evening, once the next morning. I turned off the ringer and set the phone face down on the counter while I made Iris's lunch for school. By the end of the first week, I had 14 missed calls between the 2 of them. I didn't answer a single one. I didn't listen to a single voicemail. I didn't read the text that followed. I could see the first lines in the notification previews, fragments of sentences that started with, Elise, your father, and you need to understand, and this isn't who you are. I swiped them away the same way I clear a weather alert. I went through my phone on a Sunday night after Iris was in bed. I blocked Gordon's number. I blocked Marianne's number. I blocked Wade's number. I removed myself from the family group chat, the one Marianne had created 4 years ago that I'd muted within the first month. I deleted the chat history. I went to my email and archived every message from every Donnelly address without opening them. I changed the code on the back gate. I updated the emergency contact list at Iris's school, removed Gordon and Marianne, added Ruth Halsey. I didn't do any of it in anger. I did it in clarity. Each tap, each deletion, each block number felt like setting down something I'd been carrying in my arms for so long I'd forgotten my hands were full. When I finished, I closed the phone and set it on the nightstand and lay in the dark and listened to the house. The refrigerator hummed. The streetlight cut its thin line across the ceiling. Iris coughed once in her room down the hall and then was quiet. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. It was mine. The weeks after that were not easy. I won't pretend they were. The $19,000 in canceled wholesale orders hit me in the worst possible season. Spring wedding bookings, the weeks when Wildflower and Vine did 40% of its annual revenue. One supplier had already processed Gordon's cancellation before I could intervene, and rebuilding that account took 6 weeks of phone calls, paperwork, and a letter from Dennis confirming that Gordon had no authority to act on behalf of the business. The other 2 suppliers reinstated their orders, but the disruption cost me 3 wedding contracts I couldn't fill on time. I refunded deposits. I apologized to brides. I worked 16-hour days for a month straight, sourcing flowers from secondary vendors at higher prices, rebuilding relationships that my father had tried to burn from a telephone in his living room. But the shop held. Wildflower and Vine had 8 years of reputation behind it, and reputation doesn't collapse because one man makes phone calls. I hired 2 new staff members within 3 weeks. I promoted a part-time designer to full-time. I rebuilt the schedule, restocked the cooler, and reopened the website for new bookings. By the end of that difficult spring, the waitlist for wedding florals had grown to 4 months. I learned what happened to the rest of them the way you learn most things in a city like Louisville. Through people who know people, through industry contacts, through the quiet, steady circulation of facts that nobody has to seek out because they find you on their own. Wade's brokerage account was frozen as part of the restitution order. The $41,700 he transferred sat locked in place, inaccessible, accruing nothing. The court-ordered repayment, $55,900 total, the stolen funds plus $14,200 in damages and legal fees, was more than Wade had ever had in liquid assets at one time in his life. He had no savings beyond what he'd taken from me. He had no income. His last job, the electronics store, had ended 11 months before the takeover, and he hadn't replaced it with anything except the furniture flipping, which had never generated more than sporadic cash. The criminal referral to the county prosecutor moved slowly, the way those things do. I didn't track it. Dennis kept me informed when there were developments, and I didn't ask for updates between them. What I knew was this: the forgery was documented, the evidence was filed, and the process was in motion. Wade's name was in a system now, attached to words like fraudulent conversion and forged instrument. Those words don't wash off. Tessa moved back to her parents' house within 3 weeks of the criminal referral. I heard this secondhand through a vendor who knew someone in Tessa's neighborhood. She left quietly. No announcement, no social media post. She simply wasn't at the apartment anymore. I didn't follow the story further. She disappeared from my life the same way she'd entered it, without my permission and without my interest. 4 months after I canceled that last $1,800 transfer, Gordon and Marianne's property entered tax delinquency. 4 months. That's how long 100 has owned $72,800 in accumulated payments had been masking the fact that my parents could not sustain their own household. The property taxes they'd been unable to pay before I ever opened the shop. The ones I'd been covering since the first month Wildflower and Vine turned a profit. Came due, and there was no payment. Then they came due again. And again. The delinquency notice was a matter of public record. I didn't look it up. Someone mentioned it to Dennis during an unrelated courthouse visit, and Dennis mentioned it to me. I listened. I said nothing. I felt the information settle into a place in my chest that was already quiet and still and close. They had received $172,800 from me over 8 years. They had never once acknowledged it as anything other than expected. They had never set foot in my shop. They had never called to ask about Iris's surgery. And when I had finally defended myself, when I had done the one thing any business owner would do when faced with a forged document and a drained account, my father had called my suppliers to destroy what I'd built, and my mother had called to tell me her blood pressure was my fault. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the specific, clean weight of a door that had closed and would not reopen. Some doors close so better ones can open. I knew that now the way I knew the price of peonies in April. Not as a theory, but as a fact I had lived. 6 months after the court ruling, Wildflower and Vine was fully staffed and running on a schedule I didn't have to manage alone. Ruth came back. I'd called her the week after the amendment was voided. I didn't make a speech. I said, "The shop is mine again. Your position is open if you want it." She was quiet for 3 seconds, then she said, "I'll be there Monday." She was there Monday. She walked in at 6:15 a.m., put on her apron, and started conditioning roses like she'd never left. She didn't mention Wade. She didn't mention the firing. She set a small package on my desk before she started, wrapped in brown paper. I opened it later, alone in the back office. It was Iris's pressed flower card, smoothed flat, every petal reattached where it had come loose. Ruth had kept it in a book for months, pressed between wax paper, waiting. I bought a simple white frame. I hung the card behind the register, next to the shop's first dollar bill from the farmer's market booth. It hung slightly crooked. I left it that way. The wait list for wedding florals hit 6 months. I turned away more work than I accepted because I refused to overbook. The shop was the same cooler, same work tables, same bell above the door, and entirely different. The air was different. I was different. The weight I'd been carrying for 8 years was gone, and in its place was just the shop, just the work, just the steady rhythm of a business I had built with my own hands in a city that knew my name. Iris came by after school that first week. She walked through the door with her backpack half unzipped and her jacket hanging off one shoulder, the way 9-year-olds walk everywhere. She stopped at the counter. She looked up at the frame behind the register. She stood there for a long time, her head tilted slightly. She didn't ask about Wade. She didn't ask about Gordon or Marianne. She didn't ask why things had changed or when they'd gone wrong or whether we'd ever see them again. She looked at her pressed flowers behind the glass, and then she looked at me. "It looks good there, Mom." I smiled. She smiled back. She dropped her backpack behind the counter and asked if she could help sort the ribbon drawer, and I said yes, and she climbed onto the stool she'd been climbing onto since she was 5, and the bell above the door chimed as a customer walked in, and the shop was open, and we were fine. I never regretted a single second of it. That was the only legacy I gave her. Not the money, not the silence, not the years of swallowing things that should never have been swallowed. I gave her the knowledge that you can build something real and protect it. That boundaries aren't cruel, they're protection. That family isn't a title you inherit. It's a relationship you maintain with respect. And that when someone throws away what your child made with her own hands while she's lying in a hospital bed, you don't scream. You don't beg. You don't explain. You file the complaint. You forward the evidence. You cancel the transfer. And you hang the card behind the register where it belongs. The cut was clean. If you enjoyed this story about protecting what you've built and knowing when to walk away from family who never valued you, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.